Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Healing Overflow with Dr. Toy. Listen, we got some more things to talk about today. I'm hoping that all of this information is helpful because, y'all, we are still going through. This pandemic won't go away. So, you know what? I can't stop talking about it. We need to heal while we're still in the middle of a pandemic. You know, as adults, we're going through so much. And it's like, what in the world are we going through, right? And how can we keep thriving in the middle of a pandemic when we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? So as adults, we're going through so much, we're experiencing trips being canceled. We're experiencing loss of loved ones, depression, anxiety. Folks that never struggled with depression, never struggled with anxiety are now like, I can't get out of bed because it's cold and it's dark. And you know what? I'm so tired of hearing about this pandemic, right? So if our adults, if we're going through so much, what in the world are our children going through? How are they making it through? Because we know what happens in the house trickles down to the children. So today, we're going to talk about how to help children and teens thrive through a pandemic with good mental health. We're going to share some tips, but also we're going to share some signs, what to look for if your teen or your kid is struggling mental health wise in this pandemic. So I brought on a guest who is an expert with children and a therapist. Her name is Megan Cook. I'm very excited to have her today. Let me read a little bit of her bio. And of course, you can go on the Healing Overflow page. Please please share this video. Go on Healing Overflow and see the rest of Megan's bio. So I'll just read a short blurb. Megan Cook is a licensed professional counselor and board certified art therapist with over 7 years of experience in the mental health field. She graduated with a master's of art therapy with a specialization in counseling from Seton Hill University in 2015. The first 5 years of her career, she spent directing her work with victims of violence and crime on individual, family group, and community levels. She's currently employed as a psychotherapist with the Cognitive Behavioral Institute in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She is a certified EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a therapy technique and exposure and response prevention therapies with target trauma, grief, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder. She is trained in parent-child interaction therapy and trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which we call TFCBT. Y'all, she's the real deal, and I can't wait until you hear from her. Please put your virtual hands or your real hands, I don't care, clap in your living room for my friend Megan Cook.
Good morning.
Can you hear?
Woo! Absolutely. All over virtual.
Good frigid cold morning. We're here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We've had a lot of drama happen this morning with our bridges collapsed. So, shout out, prayers, positive thoughts and vibes to those that had to experience that and had to deal with it. Also, shout out to our EMS, our firefighters, our police, our first responders. If it wasn't for y'all, I'm sure it would have been more fatal and more devastating. So thank you to that. I just had to mention that.
Absolutely.
Megan, how you doing this morning?
I'm good. I'm very well. Drinking coffee, staying warm.
Yeah, or this afternoon or evening, depends on
whenever you post it. Yeah, I'll still be sipping coffee then. So absolutely.
Listen, I mean, you heard my introduction. As an adult, how it's been struggling through this pandemic. I just want to jump right in there and just really talk about, like, what are you seeing in your practice as a therapist working with children and teenagers?
I'm seeing the entire spectrum of the impact, from heightened anxiety to depression to actually some people's anxiety getting better because they're less likely to be put into the situations that activate their stress response. So it's both. It's running the gamut. With teens and kids, I would say I'm seeing more anxiety, and that's coming in the forms of not only obsessive compulsive disorder, but also separation anxiety and generalized anxiety. All the anxieties that we really think of have really been almost on hyperdrive, just because of how much uncertainty, which is the crux of anxiety, how much uncertainty we're all living in. You know, next week, is
Yeah.
there going to be a new variant? Next week, are we going to be wearing masks? Next week, am I going to be virtual at school, or am I going to be in school? So it's just all this uncertainty, and that is the crux of anxiety.
I mean, we woke up today and saw that, several schools went
Yeah.
back to virtual. And,
Yeah.
a lot of my colleagues, their children are home for a couple of weeks because of the outbreak
Yes.
of more COVID, What in the world does that do to a child? Like you talked about having the social anxiety. So
Yeah.
just dive into that a little bit more and help our viewers
Yeah.
with that.
I think, with the social anxiety, I am noticing that more with my tweens and teens, right? So they're in that developmental phase where family life kind of fades into the background, and social and peer connections, that is priority number one, right? What my friends think, where we're going on Friday, who's going to be there, and so then it's also those formative years where these teens and tweens are working really hard to navigate those social interactions and the nuances and the complexities of all of that. And so because they are lacking that face-to-face connection time, I'm noticing these anxieties around, am I saying the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? A lot of the fear of rejection and fear of not fitting in and belonging. And it's I think that is a direct relation. Anecdotally, I don't know that there's data that's backing this up yet. I think my clinical gut is telling me there's going to be kind of quantified data about it, but it's just these kids are not getting that same face-to-face unsupervised connection with peers that really allow them to hone those social skills that they're then going to use in college and then the job market and then beyond into dating and romance and all of that. So they're second guessing. They're not having as much time to practice and flex those muscles. And so then they're, that priority of friendship is being really kind of cut off at the knees. And so that, it's just really driving up that social anxiety.
So what if you have somebody like my son who, okay, so I have opposites here. My son's a teenager. My tweenie is my girl, and she really needs that social interaction. If she's not in school and she's home virtually, she gets weepy, mopey.
Yeah.
But my son says, bring it on. That's how,
Right.
And he'll stay in his room for hours, or he'll do video games or just work on it. So what that variation with the children, I saw there was still a need. They still, just because he's okay in the room, like what's happening to the isolate to the kid that says isolation is fine.
I think that is speaking towards what I've seen is this mega burst of dysregulation. Right. So if we're not flexing those muscles of, man, that kid said something that made me mad, or I'm having a harder day, but all we have is our rooms and our tablets and our phones, we're not getting that ability to practice internal self-regulation. And then we're relying on screens. Right. So then you have this lack of practicing social skills, this lack of regulation, this increase in screen time, which we know correlates with kind of dopamine dumps in the brain. So there's that addictive quality. You have just this perfect storm coming together that's reaching both ends of the spectrum, right? Your kiddo who's like, social interaction, it's the best. It gives me life. And then you have that other end of the spectrum who's like, no, I'm fine being by myself. It has implications for both. I don't think it's only bad for those so-called extroverts, or it's only bad for so-called introverts. It's having adverse effects on the emotional, spiritual, mental well-being of both ends, the entire spectrum.
Wow. So as a parent, I go, oh, shoot.
Yeah.
Like what am I supposed to be seeing that I might not know? Like what can I look for? To know, like, if my kid's in trouble,
Yeah. And I could go into individuals, right? But I think if you look at the umbrella and the overarching kind of red flags that parents can really, really keep an eye out for is, and this is so vague, but a shift in your kiddo's baseline behavior, right? If you have a kiddo who is typically really withdrawn, and all of a sudden they're incredibly attached to you, or they're really struggling with separation anxiety, that's a red flag, because that's telling you, okay, they're missing something. A need is not being met. Or if you have a kiddo who is gregarious and outgoing and bubbly, and all of a sudden they're sullen and angsty beyond, I think, caveat, beyond that typical teen tween angst, I think looking at, wow, my kid's behavior and attitude is done a 180, that's a huge red flag.
Mm-hmm.
So that opposite, they swing on you. Or again, swinging back to that dysregulation, if all of a sudden disruptions or disappointments that your kiddo could typically weather relatively well, all of a sudden they're tearful a lot, or they're getting really angry and irritable and lashing out at things that you're going, this doesn't make sense. In my experience, my kid's relatively good at navigating this, and all of a sudden that dysregulation is there and they're having trouble navigating those big emotions. That's another red flag.
Mm-hmm. Explain a little bit of dysregulation.
Yeah.
Social anxiety. Like what is this stuff?
Yeah. So social anxiety is that stress response that your brain has to social interactions that may evoke fight, flight, freeze. So you might have a kiddo go into freeze, or a panic attack, or you might have a kid who's struggling to make eye contact because that's such a vulnerable thing. So all of those things that people who do not struggle with anxiety or social anxiety, they don't even think about, right? It comes as naturally as blinking and breathing. That social anxiety is kicking in, and this kid has to think about every interaction. And with that thinking comes all of the what ifs behind it. What if I said something weird? What if I don't know what to say? What if I trip and fall? What if I make a fool of myself? What if they don't like me?
Yeah.
All of those what ifs. And for kids who struggle with social anxiety, one of the biggest kind of most common fears and phobias in our life is public speaking, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're an adult who has to public speak and you get that rush and wave of adrenaline and cortisol, that's what a kiddo with social anxiety is experiencing in those scenarios. So it's quite literally a stress response in the brain. Wow. It's not shyness. It's not, introversion. It's a desire to connect socially with an inability because they're in fight, flight, and freeze.
Wow. So my kid never had anxiety problems. He doesn't have these problems, but because of this pandemic and the longevity and the back and forth, the ambiguity of the pandemic, he now or she now has this social anxiety, something that you've not seen as a parent before.
Right. Because think about it. You're getting thrown into these situations that you've not been in for so long. And, when we're, as humans, when we're thrown into anything new, our automatic thought is this a threat? Is this dangerous?
Right.
Right. And that's, evolutionary leftover. It keeps us safe. It's a mechanism that we need. And because of the pandemic, it's on hyperdrive.
So the pandemic takes it
going off every time you turn the stove on instead of just when you burn the toast.
Whoa.
Right.
Okay. So if I had existing problems, it's on heightened. Yes. And if I didn't have any problems, now I have some anxiety.
Yeah.
I might. Okay, good. So this dysregulation stuff you're talking about, explain that a little bit for our viewers.
Yeah, dysregulation is those moments where your child can't navigate. It's like their emotions exploded, right? So tantrums are often seen as dysregulation. I guess let me caveat that with tantrums that are outside the age appropriate development stage, right? If you're thinking 3-4-year-old, that's a pretty typical behavior that you see in a 3 and a 4-year-old. If you're getting up to 8, 9, 10, and your child is screaming and crying and kicking and throwing, then you're going, what in the world? They didn't do this a year ago. That's dysregulation. That's their mind and body not being able to cope with these really big, overwhelming feelings.
Right.
or if you have a kid who gets really excited about something and is bouncing off the walls and cannot physically settle themselves down, but needs to rely on someone else or something else all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Dysregulation happens to all of us, even as adults, right? You have those days where you're cranky and you're lashing out at your spouse or your kids or your dog or whomever. But it's when it's becoming this really regular pattern of behavior that it's becoming an issue. And
So this is really interesting, Megan. I want to stay on this a little bit
yeah,
because we're seeing an uptick across the United States, in
yes,
particular, of violence. And so, with our teenagers in particular, going on
Mhm.
in Pittsburgh right now, but
Yeah.
Chicago, Philly, we're seeing Detroit. There's this uptick of violence. Can this be a cause of this dysregulation that you're talking about? Is there a
You know,
connection there?
I hadn't really thought about it or conceptualized it in that manner. And I maybe is my best, I think answer there. But if you also think about it as where are the social supports when we're in a pandemic and we're kind of pulled away from our natural resources, then are we as humans just going and grasping at straws for any sense of belonging and
Mm.
acceptance and social support? And is that looking like these people that I normally would not spend my time with are the only accessible people, whether that's family or
Right.
friends or neighborhood or whatever? I don't know. I think that one, I wonder, will be, is that going to be a more clear cut answer longitudinally after we're a few
Mm.
years out and we look at the studies? So with that, I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. I
You
mean,
know,
you
I
made a good point. Our social supports were taken away, put back, taken away, put back. Those that
yeah,
go to church or the mosque or the synagogue, it's like we couldn't congregate
couldn't.
with those folks anymore. We couldn't go over, mom, dad, grandpa, whatever as
Yeah,
much. And so it's given back, but then it's taken away every time this variable comes.
yeah,
But what you're saying makes so much sense. When I as a kid used to be able to calm myself down or go play ball or
yeah,
get with my friends or something like that. I am now at heightened awareness. I am now overflowing. I am a bottle of pop being shaken up to the max, and so
yeah,
I can't calm down. I can't.
yeah. And
If
then you spill
somebody
the milk and you everyone just explodes.
Right, right. You
Absolutely.
looked at me, you said something, pow, I'm in your face.
You
When
lash
usually
out.
I could brush it off before, but now I'm my cup is full. I can't take no
Right.
more.
And so
Yeah.
we as adults, we carry our coping skills kind of internally at this point, right? We have an entire life of experience of what do I do when someone says something that makes me mad or irritates me? And we're struggling with that. So imagine a kiddo who doesn't have a lifetime of all of that practice is now going, the only way I feel calm and regulated is by looking at a screen because it's giving me
Mhm.
stimulation
Mhm.
and it's giving me something to focus on. And then take that away, you have this dysregulation. And then you
Yeah.
have this dysregulation at school or lack of support. Yeah. I mean, I think the lack of access to natural resources that kids typically have, clubs after school, friends, sleepovers, church, Sunday school, Hebrew school, whatever those kind of tenets or those pillars are, have gone away or gone virtual. And it's not the same for kids. It really is not.
Virtual's not the same.
It's not. It's not,
Not the
right?
same. No,
And clearly, you
no.
see my hands moving. I talk with my hands a lot. That's cut off. So
Right.
we're also asking kiddos to then only focus on one form of communication.
Okay, so we got to talk about this mask
Yeah,
because you're
sure.
talking about communication. I
Yeah,
am so expressive, like and,
yeah,
I'm a college professor. I teach every week, and that was taken away from me, being able to read my students' expressions, but
yes,
them being able to read mine and know
yeah.
that I'm smiling or I'm like, oh, they could
Oh,
only see.
yeah. So I
What
think,
does that do to a kid?
and so this is such a tricky one because it's become polarized, right? It's so polarized and politicized. And
Mhm.
there's good points on both ends, right? So I think looking at it from not either or, but both and is going to be incredibly important, right? So we're asking parents to walk this incredibly fine line of physical health, right? We don't want our kids to get sick, and emotional social health. We want our kids to be able to interact with their peers and their teachers. And so what's happening is it's keeping our kids safe physically, which is incredibly important because if they're not safe physically, they're not going to be able to be in that environment, right? But then we're also taking away another form of communication, facial expressions. And if we're looking at kids who are either neurodivergent, right? So ADHD, autism spectrum, all of those things, you've got not only a sensory aspect to having something on the skin, but also obscuring the face. You've got that aspect where they're not paying attention to communication because they're distracted by what's happening sensory, right? Then you also have kids, and I've seen this with my adults too, that because of interpersonal trauma, they rely on microaggressions, or not microaggressions. Hopefully they don't rely on microaggressions, microexpressions
There you
to
go.
actually pick up on moods and what's being said. So then you have, they're seeing from here up, right? Like that's all they're getting. And so if kids who are neurodivergent or who are working with trauma here are only getting either from here up on a screen or from here up in person, then you're cutting off a kid's ability to actually socially read the information that's being crossed non-verbally. So then you take that back to the social anxiety as well. And they're going, oh my gosh, was that a joke or was that true? Was that sarcasm? Was that not? Because we're missing all of the micro expressions.
Got you. So then let's take the mask off.
Yeah.
And put them in a classroom in the middle of a pandemic. But what's the problem with that?
The problem with that is then you've got people getting sick over and over and over and over again, right? Or you've got your kid who's in school for a week and then has an exposure and is sent back for 10 days. So there's a disruption to routine. And then they go back for 3 days. And then the kid to their left is now sick and then they get sent home. So you've got a disruption in routine.
Okay. Wow.
You've got the uncertainty. Am I going to be in school? Am I not? You have teachers getting sick too, right? So then you've got this person who's that stable adult now being taken out and substituted, right? So it's playing again with routine and consistency and uncertainty, spiking anxiety, spiking a kid's kind of, I mean, think about, you know, when kids have Spirit Week and you've got all of these activities that are disrupting the routines. You know, if you ask a teacher, they're going, those weeks are the worst because kids are excited and kids are not able to sit still. And now think about doing that all year, and how rough that is, not only on the teachers, but on the kids and then on the parents.
Right. And you can't use like what you used to do, touching and hugging, and you're still like, get away, put hands on.
Don't breathe on me. Yes.
Get off of me.
Yes. You didn't use hand sanitizer, right?
Or you cough and everybody just hits the ground. Poor kids. You know, kids stay with a little snotty nose and all that sort of thing. And now we can't.
They're Petri dishes. They're absolute Petri dishes. Yeah.
Yeah. I just got an email before I signed on with you that, you know, there's, you know, someone in my kids' classroom had COVID. And so now we have to watch symptoms. It's constant. And so we can't just ditch the mask, but then we have issues that come with the mask. Megan, as a parent, I'm like, are these lasting? Are we going to see these symptoms forever? And just to mention, I'm going to mention some concrete symptoms like grades dropping, sleep issues, grief. We're grieving, and the children are grieving the old way of life. Dysregulation, Megan talked about, anger, violence. Are we gonna see this forever? Like, can this be healed? What can we do?
I mean, the optimist in me wants to say absolutely, right? Because there's a lot of helpers in the world and there's a lot of ways to reconnect and repair all of that. And I think if we look at even something like the ACEs study, right? So we know that prolonged or acute stress in childhood has lasting effects. So are we going to see that, right? We know that is a thing. That is that has been proven statistically over and over that chronic stress and trauma and adverse experiences in childhood correlate to adulthood struggles, from mental health to, like you said, the concrete ones, right? So you got heart disease and sleep disturbance and stress and anxiety. So are we potentially, right? Because I think we're still we're not even out of the pandemic. Let's talk about that, right? We're not out of this yet. But then we've already been in it. We're going on our 3rd year.
Yeah.
That's a long time for kids and adults' bodies to be navigating just dumps of stress and cortisol and adrenaline day in and day out.
Wow. But now I'm worried. My kids are doomed. Like you're a therapist that works with children and works with families. What are some techniques that you're implementing that are actually helping? Can you give some tips to our audience?
Absolutely. I think deliberate connection time away from screens, deliberate, and that can be family nights if you are really a family who has to be very cautious about exposure, game nights, or car rides to look at views around the city, or let's bake something together, let's do a project. So hands-on, one-to-one connection. And if you are a family who is a little bit more comfortable or has the ability to take a little bit more risk, connecting kids with peers, creating scenarios where they get to have one-on-one time with kids of their own age, where it's not structured, right? Where they can engage in that imaginative play and just hanging out with their friends. Now with parents, I think routine, right? Routine, consistency in, before bed, we do bath, and then we do brushing teeth, and then a story, and then we crawl into bed. So routine is really good.
Yes.
Now I think also being cautious about differentiating between routine and a rigid schedule, because that doesn't allow for that flexibility of different needs being met. So just making sure you almost have a rhythm to the day is really important. I think making sure there are parameters around how much screen time kids are getting. That is a little trickier, I will say, with teenagers, because their phones are their lifeline to their peers. Just as much as, growing up before cell phones, the landline with the curly cord, we as teens would be stuck on that for hours. It's the same with kids today. It just looks different. So I think monitoring screen time, is it being used in a productive way versus a mindless way that's numbing? How is screen time being used? I think prioritizing healthy exercise routines, or at least physical activity, movement, because we know that is a release for adrenaline and cortisol. It also gives a nice dump of feel-good neurotransmitters and hormones. I think eating well, a balanced meal, which I know is, the other thing is, think about too, kids are only going to be as good as the adults are around them. So also, tip for adults, if you want your kids to be good, you got to be good yourself. You got to be making time for self-care and regulation yourself, because a dysregulated adult is not going to be able to regulate a dysregulated kid. So it's almost like top down, right? Adults, make sure you're good. Do the things you got to do. Go to therapy, do happy hours if you need to, start a new hobby, go to bed early. And then what you're going to see is, if your bandwidth is nice and wide, then you're going to be able to really support your kids and teens better.
Wow. Listen, I was over here trying to get all this good stuff down, clicking buttons and stuff over here, and just trying to get all this good advice down. We're so used to, as caregivers, as parents, to take care of the kids first.
Absolutely.
Make sure they're okay. But that's not even what airplanes tell us to do.
No.
Yeah, take care of yourself first. Put the oxygen mask on you. Take care of your
Yeah.
children. That's going to trickle down. Take care of yourself. Then that's going to trickle down on your kids.
Yeah,
I know when I'm in a grumpy mood, everybody in the house in a grumpy mood. But when I'm in
absolutely.
a good mood, everybody's like, "Mommy's good to go."
We're good. Absolutely. Yes. And I also think, gosh, approach the kids with the same compassion that we approach adults, right? We as adults give leeway and compassion if someone's saying, I'm having a bad day and I am grumpy today,
Mhm.
right? And we expect kids not to be grumpy. We expect kids to be tip top all the time.
Oh,
Also,
yeah.
acknowledge that they're going to wake up on the wrong side of the bed too, because this is a long 2 and some change years for them as well.
Yeah. So what I heard with that statement is give the kids grace, just like
Yeah.
we need grace. We need some room to be snotty, just like they're gonna be snotty. So
Yeah.
Megan, that's such good advice. These tips are wonderful. Y'all, I'm going to list Dr. Toy's tips and therapist Megan tips on Healing Overflow. Please go on Healing Overflow. Like the page if you haven't already. Email me at drtoyjones@gmail.com for any questions or any concerns about your little ones. Follow me on Twitter, Prof. Toya Jones, like our WXCN radio page, WXCN Power Radio page. You can also reach out to Megan. I've been providing the information throughout this video. If you just want to talk and you want to have a referral to a therapist because you said, oh man, my kid's in trouble, my kid's struggling. Listen, we can heal through this pandemic, y'all. We can get through it and we can get our kids through it one day at a time. We are not to have A+ and perfect and stars all the time. Sometimes we're going to have a B- day. Look, sometimes we'll be a D- day, Next day is another day. So look on the page, on Healing Overflow page for these tips that we're sharing with you. And we're going to be all right. Let's keep healing. Let's keep healing so that our healing overflows onto others. Thank you so much, y'all. Have a beautiful and wonderful week. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.